In today's video, we'll explore 5 last selfies of people who were eaten alive by animals. From a student's violent encounter with an alpha baboon to a retiree's fatal meeting with a territorial hippo. But our first story takes us to India, where a young engineer was about to discover that the perfect angle can sometimes be the perfect trap. It was December 12, 2015, along the tidal mangroves of the Godavari River in Andhra Pradesh, India. The sun hung low, casting long shadows across the water, and the mudflats glistened under a thin layer of tidal moisture. Among the mangrove roots, a tragedy quietly awaited, one that would claim a life in a sudden, horrifying way. Kian Ishan, 29, a software engineer from Hyderabad, had planned the weekend getaway meticulously. Known among his small Instagram following for daring selfies in precarious locations, he had a reputation for walking a thin line between thrill-seeking and recklessness. Kian's workdays were structured and sedentary, filled with code and screen glare, but he craved moments of physical risk as a counterbalance. His friends said that his trip to the Godavari mangroves was likely motivated not by exploration or wildlife study, but by the desire to capture a photo that would outdo all his previous extreme posts, to show control in a setting few dared to tread. Kian had a habit of rationalizing danger. He studied wildlife from afar online, believed he could interpret animal behavior, and trusted his instincts. His decision to lean over narrow mangrove roots reflected both confidence and a misjudgment of the river's hidden hazards. Kian was aware of reports of saltwater crocodiles in the area, but considered them rarely active during daylight. He had read that crocodiles occasionally bask in shallow water and could attack if provoked, or if food was perceived nearby, but he underestimated the possibility. The mangrove forest was dense, the network of roots rising like spindly columns from shallow, brackish water. Saltwater crocodiles in this region can reach 12 to 15 feet in length and weigh over 1,000 pounds. They are ambush predators, relying on stealth and sudden bursts of speed. Despite their lethargic appearance when floating, they can strike in seconds, using immense jaw strength to crush bone. Crocodiles in the Godavari are known to be territorial, and some individuals have been observed hunting during daylight in areas frequented by humans, which made the risk higher than Kian assumed. Earlier that morning, Kian had noticed small ripples near his chosen photo spot, which locals later noted as typical crocodile ambush behavior. A nearby fisherman had called out from the bank, warning him to stay closer to solid ground. He ignored the caution, assuming the animal was too far to pose a threat. Low tide exposed some mangrove roots, making balancing slightly easier, but also offering the crocodile partial cover. Kian crouched, adjusting the camera angle, repeatedly taking pictures with hand gestures toward the water below. Each lean brought him closer to the edge, and each ignored ripple brought him closer to the apex predator beneath. At that moment, a 12-foot saltwater crocodile, nearly invisible in the muddy water less than 10 feet away, lunged. The motion was explosive. Kian's torso was seized just below the ribcage. His legs flailed against the slippery root as the crocodile twisted violently, dragging him partially into the brackish water. Observers on a nearby bank could only stare as the crocodile performed a death roll, evidently breaking ribs and puncturing lungs, pulling him away from the precarious safety of the exposed roots. The crocodile's bite remained relentless. Witnesses saw water churned red as his attempts to push away the massive head failed. With each roll, his body twisted unnaturally, and blood bubbled to the surface. For seconds he appeared briefly above water, gasping, only for the crocodile to drag him under again. The sounds were muffled but distinct. Splashes, a sharp tearing of clothing, and a gurgling that cut through the humid mangrove air. Within 2 minutes, the predator pulled him completely into deeper channels where observers lost sight, leaving only the blood-stained water and scattered debris of his belongings as evidence. 2 fishermen on the opposite bank immediately called the local forest office. By the time help arrived 12 minutes later, the crocodile had retreated, and the water showed only the torn strap of his backpack and fragments of his camera. His body was recovered later downstream, partially consumed, confirming the extent of predation. The coroner's report documented death by a combination of drowning and catastrophic blunt force trauma. Specific findings noted a collapsed chest cavity with multiple comminuted rib fractures, a punctured lung, and crush injuries to the thoracic spine consistent with the immense bite force of a large crocodile. Tissue damage indicated multiple violent rotations, which caused fatal internal injuries and rapid unconsciousness prior to drowning. Post-mortem consumption was confirmed, but was not the primary cause of death. In the aftermath, Kian's family returned quietly to Hyderabad, holding a subdued cremation. The mangroves remained largely unchanged, with local fishermen now marking the site as hazardous. The Forest Office erected minimal signage after the incident, noting the presence of saltwater crocodiles and emphasizing caution during low tides. Even as the mangroves of India claimed another victim to the ancient predators, in South Africa, a student would discover that the most dangerous animals aren't always the ones hiding in the shadows. Sometimes they're the ones bold enough to approach in broad daylight. It was August 19th, 2017, at Table Mountain Nature Reserve in Cape Town, South Africa. The morning air was crisp and sunlight filtered through the scattered trees, casting uneven shadows on the hiking paths. In a small clearing near the edge of a rocky slope, a tragedy unfolded with alarming speed, leaving only blood and scattered belongings as evidence. Leah Dumasani, 14, was a bright, curious student from Cape Town with a keen interest in photography and social media. Outgoing but cautious in most aspects of daily life, she often measured risks carefully, except when the approval of peers was at stake. She had joined the school excursion, hoping to combine learning about local ecology with capturing memorable images for her friends online, a personal habit of documenting experiences in notebooks and on her phone. Leah had some experience with smaller urban monkeys in city parks, which may have contributed to a misplaced confidence in her ability to handle wildlife encounters. She carried only a water bottle, her phone, and a notebook in a lightweight backpack, with no protective gear or items to distract animals. Encouragement from classmates who cheered and urged her to get a cool selfie pushed her beyond her usual limits. Her decision to step closer to the clearing was influenced by her desire to balance caution with achievement. She had noticed signs posted along the path, warning visitors not to approach or feed the baboons, but ignored them for reasons unclear. Leah had previously observed smaller monkeys at a local park, and maybe assumed she could manage a brief encounter. Her backpack contained only a water bottle, her phone, and a notebook, offering no means of defense or distraction. The clearing itself was uneven, with exposed roots and loose rocks beneath the baboons' usual feeding spots. The troop, numbering around a dozen, moved through the area with predictable hierarchy, females and juveniles foraging near the ground while dominant males kept watch from slightly elevated positions. Adult male baboons, particularly the dominant alpha, are capable of bursts of aggressive speed, their bite force exceeding 500 pounds per square inch, sufficient to crush bone. Their sharp canine teeth are designed for defense and predation, not just display, and they react unpredictably when humans encroach on their space. In rare circumstances, multiple males will attack together if they perceive a serious threat, dramatically increasing the risk of severe injury. Earlier in the morning, other tourists had gathered near the clearing, some ignoring posted warnings entirely. A ranger had passed through minutes before and noted increased tension among the troop, with the dominant male vocalizing low warning grunts. Leah's group approached from roughly 15 feet away, holding phones, and she hesitated only briefly before stepping forward to capture the shot. Several tourists noted that the alpha male's gaze remained fixed, a subtle growl escaping as he adjusted his stance. Small movements, rustling leaves, shifting shadows were already present, but the children interpreted them as background activity rather than early warning signs. As Leah extended her phone toward the troop and took a picture, the alpha male lunged. This time, another adult male joined in, rapidly closing the distance and cornering her against uneven ground and low rocks. His jaws clamped onto her upper right arm just above the elbow, teeth piercing deep into the bicep and severing muscle fibers. She cried out, dropping the phone, which landed among the roots and leaves. The baboons shook her violently, leveraging their combined weight to pull her off balance, and then bit repeatedly at her shoulders and torso. The sound of tearing tissue, mingled with the snapping of roots under the animal's feet, filled the clearing. Blood soaked her school uniform quickly, dripping onto rocks and dry leaves, forming a vivid trail. During the struggle, Leah slipped onto a jagged rock, causing additional blunt trauma to her ribs and torso. Her friends, frozen at 10 to 15 feet away, initially tried to move closer but were blocked by the baboon's positioning and aggressive stance. Several began filming in panic before stopping as the severity of the attack became clear. The dominant male and a second male rolled and shook Leah, her body partially pinned against a low rock. Limbs flailed and scraped against roots, skin splitting and bruising from repeated bites. The alpha bit at the torso, puncturing ribs and creating deep lacerations. The combination of bite wounds and blunt trauma from the fall caused severe hemorrhaging, which, along with the sustained attack, resulted in her losing consciousness after approximately 2 minutes. A nearby hiker, seeing the attack from a parallel path, ran to the ranger station and called for assistance. Park rangers arrived within 10 minutes, but Leah was already unresponsive. They used improvised means to drive the baboons away and secured the scene. Her body showed extensive trauma, multiple deep puncture wounds to the biceps, lacerations across the shoulders and torso, and severe blood loss. The coroner's report later concluded that death resulted from hemorrhagic shock due to exsanguination. Specific injuries listed included a severed brachial artery from a deep bite wound to the right bicep, multiple rib fractures with associated pulmonary contusions, and extensive lacerations across the shoulders and torso. These wounds, compounded by significant blunt force trauma sustained during the attack, led to rapid and irreversible blood loss. During the ride to the ranger station, several of the children remained quiet, intermittently crying, while others whispered fragmented accounts of what they had seen. Counselors and teachers later spent hours debriefing the group, helping them process the trauma. Some students were unable to return to normal classes for days, suffering from nightmares or sudden panic at reminders of the clearing and the troop. The baboons proved that aggression doesn't always come from the apex predators tourists expect, and deep in Sumatra, a man would learn that the most patient killers are often the ones that wait motionless until their prey comes close enough to touch. It was March 7, 2019, near Bukit Lawang in northern Sumatra. The jungle air hung heavy with humidity. A dense canopy filtered sunlight into fragmented shafts, illuminating patches of moss and low undergrowth, while shadows deepened around narrow trails. In one of these quiet, low-traffic areas, a sudden, fatal encounter awaited, a reminder of how quickly control can be lost in the wild. Rizal Putra, 26, had traveled from Medan for a brief wildlife excursion, hoping to capture engaging content for his small but growing TikTok audience. A software technician by profession, he spent most days in front of screens and rarely engaged in outdoor pursuits beyond casual hikes. His interest in snakes was long-standing. He had raised reticulated pythons in captivity and often posted handling videos, which had earned him cautious admiration online. Confident in his prior experience, he underestimated the differences between captive and wild snakes. Earlier that week, he had scouted a quiet jungle path, aware that low foot traffic reduced the risk of disturbance but increased the unpredictability of wildlife. That day, Rizal carried only his smartphone and a small backpack, foregoing protective gloves or an emergency kit, believing his familiarity with snakes would suffice. He crouched near a shadowed area where a reticulated python, over 15 feet long and partially hidden among roots and ferns, lay coiled. Rizal positioned the camera to capture both himself and the snake in frame, believing a brief proximity posed minimal danger. His decision-making reflected a misjudgment common among hobbyists, overconfidence from prior controlled encounters applied to an environment where variables were uncontrolled. Reticulated pythons are the largest snake species in the region, capable of reaching over 20 feet in length, with muscular bodies designed for powerful constriction. They strike quickly, bite to secure a hold, and coil tightly, compressing chest and abdomen with sufficient force to fracture ribs and induce suffocation. Their behavior in the wild is unpredictable. Unlike captive snakes accustomed to handling, they respond defensively to sudden movement or close proximity. As he adjusted the phone for a second picture, he moved closer, inadvertently triggering the snake. In an instant, the python struck. The snake targeted the upper neck and shoulder area, consistent with predatory and defensive strikes observed in wild reticulated pythons. Its fangs punctured deeply, anchoring the strike. Based on later scene reconstruction, it was evident that the snake coiled rapidly around his torso, each loop pressing the chest and abdomen. The force was immediate and unyielding. Ribs cracked under constriction, lungs compressed, and internal organs shifted under pressure. Shallow bites and scratches appeared on the neck and shoulders as the snake's head moved with defensive agitation. The coiling likely intensified as Rizal struggled, but the strength of the python outmatched his efforts. Limbs scraped against roots and undergrowth, skin tearing in small patches. Each constriction slowed circulation, and red welts formed where the snake's thick body pressed against muscle and skin. During the struggle, several mid-thoracic ribs fractured under pressure, contributing to severe blunt force trauma. Within seconds, signs of consciousness waned. Chest movements became shallow and irregular, and in just minutes, Rizal's movements ceased entirely. A local guide, walking along a nearby trail, happened upon the scene by chance. Seeing the snake coiled around a motionless figure, he used a machete to pry the coils apart and cut the snake free. Emergency services were contacted afterward. They arrived in approximately 15 minutes. Despite attempts to resuscitate him, Rizal had already succumbed to compressive asphyxia and crush injuries to the ribcage. The python was released back into the jungle. The autopsy documented compressive asphyxia and hemorrhagic shock as the cause of death. Forensic findings detailed multiple bilateral rib fractures, with fractures to ribs 3 to 8 on the left and 4 to 7 on the right, resulting in a fatal flail chest injury. Puncture wounds to the right, trapezius and neck were consistent with the initial defensive strike, while circumferential bruising and patterned abrasions around the torso mapped the snake's coils. Internally, the report noted pulmonary contusions, a lacerated liver, and significant intrathoracic hemorrhage, injuries consistent with sustained, powerful constriction. The village quietly recorded the incident as a tragic tourist accident. Rizal's social media accounts went dormant, a silent marker of the abrupt end to his pursuit of attention-grabbing wildlife content. The path remained accessible, but signage was increased, warning of python activity, and a subtle boundary was established around known habitats. The ancient coils of Sumatra presents that death can come from predators who strike without warning. Meanwhile, in Papua New Guinea, an American would discover that some of the world's most dangerous creatures walk on 2 legs. It was July 14, 2016, in a dense forest near the Kokoda Trail in Papua New Guinea. Along a narrow, uneven trail, a sequence of events unfolded that would quickly overwhelm one unprepared visitor, leaving only blood-stained foliage and scattered gear as evidence. Laura Beth Graves, 26, was a solo traveler from the United States with a passion for adventure and wildlife photography. A marketing assistant by profession, she spent her weekdays in a structured office environment, but devoted weekends to exploring rugged terrain and capturing rare, compelling images for her personal portfolio. Friends described her as independent, meticulous, and intensely curious. She often planned excursions around unique photographic opportunities, sunlight angles, animal activity patterns, or secluded locations, seeking shots that combined artistry with authenticity. Laura had experience hiking challenging trails in North America and Southeast Asia, but lacked familiarity with the behavior of New Guinea's more dangerous fauna. On the morning of the incident, she had carried only a DSLR camera, a small day pack, water, and basic first aid supplies. She had no protective gear, no companions aware of her precise location, and had not left a detailed itinerary with local contacts. The forest along the Kokoda Trail was dense, with thick ferns and tangled roots making footing uneven. Cassowaries are flightless birds, standing up to 6 feet tall and weighing between 130 and 170 pounds. They possess powerful legs with sharp inner claws capable of inflicting deep puncture wounds and severing muscle or major blood vessels. While often shy, cassowaries are highly territorial and can strike without warning when they perceive threats. Their speed and strength, combined with the dense undergrowth, make them formidable even to experienced hikers. Laura's DSLR later captured a large female cassowary foraging along the trail, partially hidden by ferns and roots. One of the images shows a selfie she took with the bird visible behind her, suggesting she had approached closely enough to include it in the frame. Beyond the camera's frame, the exact sequence of her movements cannot be confirmed, though it is evident she was near the cassowary. At some point, the bird struck. Its right foot caused deep lacerations to Laura's upper thigh and lower abdomen, severing muscle and puncturing blood vessels. The impact immediately would have impaired her mobility and left her sprawling on the trail. Evidence from the camera and the position of her body indicates she may have attempted to crawl away, but a second strike to the lower abdomen compounded the injuries. The bird likely retreated briefly into the undergrowth after inflicting severe trauma, leaving Laura conscious but incapacitated and immobilized by blood loss. A small pack of 3 to 5 feral dogs, likely drawn by scent and movement, approached within minutes of the cassowary attack. They fed on Laura's lower limbs and abdominal region. The exact sequence of their approach and attack cannot be confirmed, but post-mortem examination indicated multiple bite marks and shredded soft tissue consistent with active predation while she incapacitated. Any attempts at defense would have been ineffective. The bite patterns and tissue damage show repeated tearing and crushing of muscle and skin. Blood pooled rapidly around her, saturating clothing and the trail beneath. The combined trauma from the cassowary strikes and the dog attacks caused catastrophic soft tissue damage. Based on wound patterns and the severity of blood loss, she likely lost consciousness and succumbed to hemorrhagic shock within 10 to 15 minutes. A local ranger, alerted by distant hikers who saw Laura's body along the trail hours later, arrived at the scene approximately 3 hours after the initial incident. By that time, she was partially consumed already. The ranger documented the scene, distinguishing perimortem trauma from the cassowary's initial strikes versus postmortem and perimortem feeding by the dogs. The autopsy report indicated cause of death as exsanguination compounded by predation while alive, noting deep puncture wounds, shredded muscle tissue, and torn skin consistent with both the cassowary and canine attacks. Laura's remains were respectfully recovered and transported to the nearest administrative center for her family. The incident prompted local authorities to reinforce signage, instruct guides to caution independent travelers, and educate visitors on maintaining safe distances from wildlife. Laura's portfolio and online presence ceased abruptly, leaving behind only her planning notes and images documenting her careful approach to the trail, silent testimony to the risks inherent in underestimating territorial animals in remote habitats. The remote trails of Papua New Guinea proved that the most fearsome predators can appear deceptively bird-like until their razor-sharp claws find their mark. In Zambia, a retired postal worker discovered that hippos, despite their slow, bulky appearance, are among Africa's deadliest animals. It was May 22, 2016, along the Zambezi River near Livingstone, Zambia. The morning air carried the earthy scent of wet mud and riverweed, and the water's surface shimmered under the rising sun, calm and deceptively placid. Along a quiet bend of the river, a sudden, lethal encounter unfolded. Gregory Lomax, 57, a retired postman from Bristol, had been visiting Zambia on a quiet tourist excursion. Known among friends and family for his meticulous habits, daily canal walks, and love of birdwatching, he relished small adventures that combined activity with photography. He had recently taken up nature photography, often rising before dawn to capture morning light over rivers and wetlands, and he kept a small notebook documenting species he spotted on these excursions. Gregory enjoyed low-key travel, preferring local guides and off-the-beaten-path locations over crowded tourist spots, and he carried a deep curiosity about African wildlife, having read extensively about river ecosystems. On this morning, he carried only a compact digital camera, a small backpack with water and binoculars, hoping to capture a striking riverside selfie for personal keepsakes. Gregory wanted a memorable image of the Zambezi, one that captured wildlife and riverbank scenery in a single frame. His prior experience with rivers and boating gave him confidence in approaching water edges. He positioned himself on a narrow, muddy bank, crouching close to the water to include the curve of the river in his frame. Gregory had noted posted warnings about hippos' territorial behavior, but judged the risk minimal, believing he was calm, observant, and distant enough to avoid provoking an animal. His decision to kneel near the water's edge reflected a combination of desire for proximity and a misjudgment of scale. Adult hippos can weigh over 3,000 pounds, and their reactions are fast and unpredictable. While careful in many aspects of daily life, Gregory underestimated the speed and aggression of a territorial female near her feeding area. Hippos are semi-aquatic herbivores, capable of sudden bursts of speed on land and in water, with massive jaws able to crush bone. Females, especially when near calves or feeding grounds, can become highly aggressive, charging without warning. The Zambezi's muddy water can conceal large bodies, allowing a hippo to approach silently. Observers often underestimate how quickly these animals can transition from submerged calm to explosive force. Earlier that morning, ripples in the water and occasional snorts indicated hippo presence, but Gregory dismissed them as distant or inactive individuals. A lodge ranger had advised tourists to remain at least 30 feet from the water's edge in areas frequented by hippos. Other visitors had maintained the recommended distance, but Gregory leaned forward, adjusting the camera to frame himself against the river, and took multiple photos. A female hippo, partially submerged, began moving toward him, its body hidden beneath the water, eyes and ears barely visible above the surface. At approximately 9:18 a.m., the hippo exploded from the water. Its head and shoulders rose in a rapid lunge, smashing Gregory backward against the muddy bank. He attempted to scramble upright and flee, but the animal's massive jaws clamped around his torso, immediately crushing muscle and skin. The attack forced air from his lungs, cracked ribs, and applied overwhelming pressure to his chest and abdomen. Blood quickly clouded the river as his struggle intensified, small splashes mixing with the brown water. Witnesses said Gregory's limbs struck mud and exposed roots as he tried to push away, but but the hippo's size and leverage made resistance ineffective. The animal lunged at the surface, clamping its jaws around his upper body with a single, powerful bite driven by neck and shoulder mass. Gregory was forced underwater by the animal's bulk pressing down, then released as the hippo surged forward again. The injuries were caused by crushing trauma from the jaws and collisions with the riverbed, leaving him unable to swim or protect his airway. His camera slipped from his hand during one of the submersions, bobbing once at the surface before the current carried it away. Observers on the opposite bank could hear gurgles, splashes, and the faint cracking of bones under immense force. Within 4 to 5 minutes, he was pulled several feet downstream, disappearing beneath the water entirely. A nearby fisherman, witnessing the attack from across the bend, immediately called the lodge office. Help arrived in approximately 18 minutes, but the hippo had already retreated, leaving only partially submerged remains. The recovery team noted deep crush injuries, punctured organs, and extensive lacerations consistent with large mammal trauma. The coroner's report concluded the cause of death as massive blunt force trauma and exsanguination, with ribs fractured, internal organs compressed or ruptured, and severe soft tissue damage. Gregory's body was flown back to Bristol, where his family prepared for a private burial. His son, Nathaniel, took the lead in arranging the gravesite, carefully selecting a spot in the family plot and supervising the preparations. The family chose to keep the funeral private, sharing their loss only with close friends, and the Riverside Memorial remained a quiet reminder of the accident. Thanks for watching. If you like these stories, click here.